The last week of October, Minneapolis. The sky over the Twin Cities has gone the color of old iron, and the first real freeze has already arrived. Not a cold snap, not a warning, but the actual thing, the one that does not leave. In a back alley, behind a row of Nicollet Avenue apartment buildings, a man named Jerome Ellis is standing over a pile of discarded mattresses left at the curb. He is doing something that every person walking past him completely misreads. He is not digging through garbage. He is reading it. He presses his thumb into the mattress ticking, testing for moisture saturation. He knocks on the inner spring panel, listening, not touching, to determine whether the coils are still live or have compressed flat. He checks the density of the foam core the way a Finnish carpenter checks raw lumber before cutting, patiently with full attention, because the difference matters and he knows exactly what to listen for. He is 53 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing two flannels layered over a thermal base and a cracked shell parka repaired along the left zipper with electrical tape. His breath comes out in slow clouds that dissolve before they reach the fence line. He is not frantic. He is not pacing. He is not asking anyone for help. He is working. Over the course of 3 November days, in a sheltered corner between a dumpster enclosure and a brick retaining wall, Jerome Ellis built something from 8 discarded mattresses, 2 foam toppers, and a bungee-knotted futon pad. It was something the emergency shelter system of Minneapolis, with all its funding and all its brochures and all its ribbon-cutting ceremonies, had never quite managed to provide. A space that held heat, a space that held, and that space kept him alive through 11 consecutive Minnesota winters in a row. Here is the thing that should not leave you where it found you. The structure Jerome built from salvaged materials over 3 days was, by every measurable principle of thermal physics, more effective than most of the emergency options the city could officially offer him. Not marginally more effective, significantly, in ways that map directly onto the science of heat transfer, insulation design, and cold weather architecture. The system designed to keep him alive never came close to what he built to keep himself alive. And that gap between what the system promises and what it delivers is not a funding shortfall. It is not an oversight. It is not a story about one man's exceptional resourcefulness. It is an engineered failure, built deliberately year by year, budget cycle by budget cycle. And once you understand how that engineering works, you cannot look at a warming center, an encampment, or a discarded mattress the same way again. Let us start with what Jerome was actually up against. Minnesota's homeless crisis is thoroughly documented, even if what the documentation implies is rarely followed to its conclusion. Wilder Research, which has conducted Minnesota's statewide homelessness survey since 1985, counted more than 10,500 homeless Minnesotans on a single October night in their most recent study, the second highest figure in the entire history of that survey. The federal HUD point-in-time count from January 2024 documented over 2,000 Minnesotans sleeping in places not designed for human habitation. In January, in a state where the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro has recorded wind chills approaching negative 34 degrees Fahrenheit, where January averages 15 degrees above zero, where medical literature consistently establishes that exposure at those temperatures without adequate shelter can produce fatal hypothermia within hours. The system has beds, just not enough of them. It has intake requirements, including sobriety checks, identification checks, and mandatory programming that systematically exclude a significant portion of the people who need access most urgently. The people least equipped to navigate bureaucracy are the people the bureaucracy is least equipped to receive. It has geography problems. Shelters are concentrated in specific downtown corridors, while people are dispersed across 60 or 70 square miles of the metropolitan area, with no reliable transportation at 2 in the morning. It carries a racial disparity so consistent and so extreme that it stopped looking like a statistical accident a long time ago. Black Minnesotans represent approximately 5% of the state's adult population. They represent approximately 39% of its homeless adults, according to Wilder's documented data. 39%. That is not a gap in service delivery. That is a policy outcome wearing the clothes of a gap in service delivery. Because this shortage was not built by neglect, it was built by choice. Budget decisions made in committee rooms, revised year over year to look like progress while reducing actual capacity, zoning restrictions enforced through legal challenges brought by neighborhood associations with enough political capital to keep low-barrier shelters out of their zip codes, a system optimized not for outcomes, but for appearances, enough beds to state in a press release, enough outreach workers to mention in a grant report, enough warming centers to reference at a ribbon cutting, warming centers operating 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning, closed certain weekends, inaccessible without a registered phone number or a compliant intake history. Minnesota's unsheltered population began its sharpest documented climb precisely in the years following the defunding of long-term supported housing programs and the closure of regional psychiatric facilities. Those were not accidents of fiscal timing. Those were decisions made not to serve people, but to balance ledgers. The gap became the policy. The cracks bore weight. They were engineered to be exactly where they are. Jerome Ellis did not fall through a hole in a well-meaning system. He fell through a gap that was built to his exact dimensions. Not 1 ounce of that failure belongs to him. So what did he build instead? And why did it actually work? The physics here matters, because what Jerome built was not folk wisdom or improvised desperation. It was applied thermal engineering, arrived at through experience and consequence rather than textbooks, but no less rigorous for that. The first principle he was working from, whether he ever named it this way or not, is that the true enemy in extreme cold is not temperature itself. Cold is simply an absence of heat. The real enemy is movement, convection. Convection is the physical process by which heat leaves a body and disperses into surrounding air faster than metabolism can replace it. Stop that movement. Trap the air in place. You have already resolved the majority of the thermal equation before you have addressed anything else. The clearest way to understand it, a wool blanket held open in moving wind is almost entirely useless. Warmth escapes in every direction immediately. That same blanket wrapped tight inside a sealed enclosure becomes something close to a heat engine because the air trapped between the fabric and your body has nowhere to go. It sits still, it warms, it accumulates. The fibers are doing almost nothing. The trapped air is doing everything. This is why double-pane windows outperform single-pane, not because of the glass, but because of the still air sealed between them. It is why an igloo keeps a person alive at 40 below, why a down sleeping bag generates warmth in conditions that would otherwise be lethal. Dead air, motionless, sealed, undisturbed, is the most efficient passive insulator available to a human being without industrial equipment. Arctic survival training is built around this principle. Norwegian military cold weather research confirmed it. Jerome Ellis arrived at the same conclusion in a Minneapolis alley, not from a manual, but from reading 11 winters of consequence on his own body. His stacked mattresses operated on that principle at architectural scale. The foam cores and cotton batting, layered in both vertical and horizontal planes, created overlapping pockets of trapped, still air, thousands of small sealed chambers where warmth accumulated and went nowhere. The polyurethane foam in older hotel grade and construction grade mattresses, which were disproportionately represented in the curbside discards Jerome had access to, traps air within its open cellular structure in exactly the same way spray foam insulation does inside a modern wall cavity. He was not sleeping in garbage. He was sleeping inside an interlocking system of insulative air chambers he had assembled entirely by hand. The second principle was ground conduction. This one is less understood even among people who work inside emergency housing systems every day. The frozen earth in a Minneapolis January is not simply cold in the way a cold room is cold. It is a thermal sink. It draws heat from anything resting against it with the relentless efficiency of a dry sponge pressed against standing water. It is directional, continuous, without pause. People who access formal emergency shelters describe this experience consistently, waking cold from the ground and upward, from the bones outward, regardless of how many blankets are piled above them. The standard emergency cot is roughly 2 inches of canvas and aluminum between a body and a concrete floor, so the ground wins that contest every time. Jerome's base layer was 3 stacked mattresses, queen, full, and queen, creating nearly 20 inches of foam and inner springs between his body and the earth. That column of material interrupted ground conduction so completely that the frozen ground below became thermally irrelevant to his sleeping space. His body heat stayed where his body generated it. The standard shelter cot was not designed around this calculation because cots are designed around storage logistics and per unit cost. Jerome's base layer was designed around survival. The difference in outcome is not small. The third layer of what he built is what insulation professionals call a thermal envelope, the complete enclosure of a living space with insulating material on all 6 planes, including overhead. He solved the ceiling with 2 foam toppers lashed together and angled above the sleeping area in a low vault configuration. He solved the entry with the futon pad hung as a baffle, a draft-blocking curtain that retained warm air inside the opening, rather than exhausting it in a full exchange every time he passed through. The baffle is standard engineering in commercial cold storage facilities and polar research stations. Jerome made his from a salvaged futon pad and zip ties stripped from a nearby chain link fence. The entire structure sat inside a 3-sided windbreak formed by 2 brick walls and the dumpster enclosure, which deflected the dominant northwest wind approach that makes Minneapolis winters, specifically, lethally effective at stripping heat from an exposed person. He had not found shelter. He had engineered a managed microclimate, a system. Over 11 winters, he refined that system the way an engineer refines a prototype. He learned which foam densities survived repeated freeze-thaw cycles, and which ones waterlogged by mid-February and collapsed under their own absorbed weight. He learned to angle the structure so roofline melt from the adjacent building ran away from his base layer rather than into it. He rotated the inner spring units, structurally rigid but thermally lighter, to the exterior and kept the dense foam core mattresses at the interior where insulation performance was most critical. Season by season, testing, correcting, rebuilding towards something more precise. This was not desperation improvised over and over. This was mastery operating under constraint. This was engineering. Which makes the following question worth sitting with. Why did the institution that was built specifically to address this problem never develop anything approaching what Jerome built alone with no resources in 3 days? 3 failures, each worth naming precisely. The first is what the system optimizes for. The institutional shelter response is built around speed, rapid deployment, mass intake processing, visible and photographable action, because speed is what generates press coverage and grant renewals. A thermal envelope assembled over 3 days from salvaged materials by one person does not move at a pace the system can point to. It cannot be photographed at a ribbon cutting. It cannot be quantified in a deliverable. So it was never developed, never documented, never scaled. The second failure is cost structure. A $0 solution is invisible to a funding apparatus that runs on procurement, no vendor to contract, no materials to invoice, no deliverable to present at a city council budget meeting. The institutional system requires expenditure to justify its own existence, and Jerome's approach costs nothing. The system has no mechanism for recognizing that as a virtue, so it treated it as invisible. The third failure is the most corrosive. It is the arrival of what gets called professional solutions, the warming bus, the low barrier pod, the emergency hotel voucher. These technologies made improvised community-built shelter feel primitive and unnecessary by comparison. Why document how to survive with salvaged mattresses when there are climate-controlled facilities? Except the facilities are never sufficient. The buses stop before midnight. The vouchers expire. The professional solution displaced the human one without fully replacing it, and the institutional knowledge of how to survive its absence, Jerome's knowledge, was never collected, never formalized, never passed on. He kept it alive for 11 winters. The system never asked him one question about how. If you are sitting with this and wondering what it means for the person sleeping rough in your city right now, here is where it becomes concrete. The most immediate thing costs only your attention. Cities like Minneapolis process tens of thousands of discarded mattresses every single year. Many of them sit at the curb for days before collection. If you know of an encampment or an individual living rough in your area, and if you look, you will, the barrier is usually logistics, not materials. One person with a truck bed and an afternoon can move what makes the physical difference between someone surviving a 15-degree night and not surviving it. You do not need an organization. You need a truck, a willing afternoon, and the decision to treat the problem as yours rather than someone else's. The option with compounding impact is connecting with the mutual aid networks already operating in your metro area. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, grassroots organizations are building winterized structures and encampments using salvaged wood, donated foam board, and volunteer labor, working alongside and often in direct opposition to the formal shelter system. They are not well resourced. They need logistics, coordination, materials, and people willing to show up on a cold Saturday without needing recognition for it. Find them. They are operating right now. And the option that requires only your voice. The next time someone near you dismisses an unsheltered person as someone who chose this, or who simply needs to walk into a shelter, you now have a more accurate answer, not a lecture. A correction. The beds are insufficient. The intake requirements exclude the most vulnerable. The racial disparity is not a statistical accident, and a 53-year-old man in a Minneapolis alley built a more thermally effective shelter than most of what the city could formally offer him, from materials the city had already decided were garbage. Jerome Ellis was never a cautionary tale. He was never primitive. He was never someone the system simply failed to reach in time. He was an engineer, working in the only material the city left available to him, applying 11 years of disciplined, consequence-tested, iterative knowledge to a problem that institutions with far greater resources had not solved. He understood the physics of heat loss better than the procurement process that purchased the cots. He understood the geometry of wind better than the architects who designed the warming centers. He understood survival better than every brochure ever printed about it. The knowledge was never lost. It was thrown away at the curb. Every week on this channel, we excavate the stories, the real science, and the ground-level solutions that official channels never got around to explaining for the people handed broken instructions and blamed for the outcome. If that is what you came here for, subscribe, because we are not finished. Tell us in the comments, what overlooked story do you want us to find next? We are listening. We are taking notes.